Okay, hi, I'm Sarah from Parents Portal, and we have Becky from Rett UK here to talk to us this evening about what they do and give us a bit more information about Rett syndrome as well. Hi, Becky. Just whenever you're ready. Hi. So, if you could tell us a bit about yourself first and how you got involved.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So I'm a parent. My daughter Rosie is now 25. She has Rett syndrome, my eldest child. But I got involved initially when she was much younger, shortly after her diagnosis, when she was sort of 15 months old. And I became a trustee of Rett UK and was a trustee for 7 years before I left and started a charity for disabled children and young people in Brighton, where I live. Did that for 12 years, and then the position came up at Rett UK as CEO. So it's kind of a natural progression of my personal interests and experience, but also then the skills and experience I picked up of having started a charity from scratch and then running that. So yeah, now I've been there 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, could you tell us a bit about, for those that don't know, a bit about Rett syndrome and
Yeah, absolutely. So Rett syndrome is a genetic disorder. It's one of 7,000 rare disorders. It does mainly affect females, and that is down to the genetics because it's a fault that's on the X chromosome. And if you remember from your biology lessons, in a female you have two X chromosomes in each cell, and in males you have an X and a Y. So in the female cells where you've got the two X chromosomes, if you've got damaged information on one X chromosome but the other one's okay, you generally got enough good information for that fetus to be carried to full term and born. And with Rett syndrome, they develop near normally to a very large degree up to the age of about a year, 18 months. But with males, where you've got a typical XY setup and you've got damage information on the X, then often those cases don't make it to full term. The ones that do survive in the males often have an extra X chromosome, so a separate syndrome called Klinefelter syndrome, which is XXY, or they have a mosaicism of their cells, so only some of their cells are affected and not all of them. So it's slightly more complex picture with males. But so typically it affects around 1 in 10,000 females, 1 in 40,000 males. And after that period of near normal, and often that's very normal, and there really is not enough there to ring alarm bells in the first year, 18 months, anyone would think, this is going to go horribly wrong. So you've got a child that is often learns to walk, and they have some words, and they have hand use, and to all intents and purposes, outwardly, they are a neurotypical child. The devastating part of it is that you hit a regression, and that can happen sometimes overnight, which is in the case of my daughter Rosie. It can happen over a case of months, or even sometimes dragged out over a year. But essentially, that child loses skills, and typically that's the ability to have any purposeful hand use. And then lots of medical problems come out. So there are a host of comorbidities, other symptoms that occur alongside Rett syndrome. So typically epilepsy, scoliosis, which is a curved spine, lots of breathing problems, mobility problems for those that do maintain some ability to walk, autonomic dysfunction that affects the guts and the bowels, and all sorts of things. There's very little really, and sadly, that isn't affected. And you're talking about people that then end up needing 24/7 care for the rest of their life. So if you can imagine, you've gone from a child that, to all intents and purposes, is a healthy child with normal level of skills to a child that then is 24/7 dependent.
wow.
It's very devastating. Yeah. And I mean, I know from my own experience, it was you carry the child, you give birth, and you kind of count fingers and toes, and you have no conception, no idea that things could possibly go so wrong. I mean, people are commonly aware of Down syndrome, perhaps, and cerebral palsy, and those things. Down syndrome obviously can be checked for in pregnancy. Cerebral palsy is typically when there's been a difficult birth. But so you get through the birth, the pregnancy and the birth, and you just have no idea that 18 months down the
Yeah.
line, you could be facing that. And that's obviously a massive impact for the family and for the child. The child, we know people with Rett syndrome have a very good level of understanding still and awareness, and
Yeah.
they are aware of that regression and losing skills. So that's a really distressing time, not just obviously for the family observing that, but for the child experiencing that.
It must be devastating. I can't imagine how awful. What would typically be a first sign, would you say?
There is a spectrum in Rett syndrome, and at the very complex end, and that's kind of where my daughter sits as well, though we didn't obviously know it at the time. She was a very happy baby, but quite placid, almost too placid.
Okay.
Very low muscle tone. Bear in mind, she was my first child, so I had no comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that when she got to sort of a year's checkup that she wasn't doing, she never put any weight through her legs. So like typically you bounce the baby up and down on you know, and they're jumping up
Yeah.
and down, that kind of thing. She didn't do that. And that was the only thing that they sort of commented on and what we were aware of particularly. But she could say a few words. She wasn't crawling, but she was starting to get on to all fours. She could
Mm-hmm.
sit up. She could pick a cup up and finger feed, etc. So there really wasn't a lot. And in fact, when I queried it with her GP and said, you know, why is she not putting any weight through her legs at this stage? And they said, oh, well, don't worry, you know, if there was anything serious, she'd be at the hospital every day by now. I was like, right, okay, off you go. Being an over anxious parent.
Yeah.
But it is a rare disorder, and in fairness, you know, they're not going to be able to know about all these rare disorders that exist.
Mm-hmm.
You can get other children that are walking and are far more advanced in their skills than perhaps my daughter was, and then the regression can even be more severe. But typically, you have, if you're looking at how you diagnose these children, there's this typical period of near normal development, a year to 18 months, then a very marked regression where they lose skills. They can appear very autistic at that stage because, as I said before,
Okay.
they have an awareness, but they then socially withdraw because they're experiencing
Right.
regression skills that they're obviously conscious of themselves. And quite often people get misdiagnosed at this stage as being on the autistic spectrum. And it's
I
only
see.
then when they come out of the regression and they start to engage again socially
Yeah.
and also still have an ability to learn and use skills, etc., although it's at a slower pace, that then it starts getting questioned. And the very distinctive feature is the hand wringing or hand tapping, hand washing movement. So going from a child that could use their hands in a purposeful way, you've now got a child that has these stereotypical hand movements. So sometimes
Okay.
like this, hand washing, hand wringing, hands in mouth, sometimes
Okay.
apart, you know, sort of different movements apart. But typically you'll see hands clasped in some way and some sort of movement there. So
Okay.
that's a very clear sign. There is a genetic test that only came in 99. It still doesn't pick up all mutations. It's about 95% of cases it will pick up with a genetic test. So you can have a clinical diagnosis of Rett syndrome without having a positive genetic test, which can
Right.
be confusing.
Okay. So what does Rett UK do? How do they support families? How do they support the children? If you could just give us an idea of some of the
Yeah,
work that you
so
do.
we're a small national charity. We're only a team of 5. We provide advocacy for families. So often we're fighting their corner for them in terms of getting respite care, helping them the HCPs, what goes where, and you know how much input they should have from the therapist. We provide information on things like benefits and equipment and well, everything that goes with having a special needs child, really. But obviously, we're specifically talking about Rett syndrome. So we provide a lot of emotional support for parents as well, because as we said, the impact is devastating when you think you've got a neurotypical child, and actually, sorry, ma'am, you haven't. It's complete opposite of that.
Yeah.
So helping them actually just deal with the everyday stuff that they need to get through, supporting siblings and the extended family as well. So in obviously non-COVID times, that means doing face-to-face events for families. Connecting families is really important,
Yeah.
reducing isolation and feeling of, why me and no one else understands me. But talking obviously to other parents, as you know yourself, it, it's then that it becomes actually, I'm not the only one dealing with this and someone else does understand exactly how I feel. So that's really important. We have a very big project that's dedicated to specifically to communication. So one of the most disabling features of Rett syndrome is they lose the power of speech. So that doesn't mean to say that they can't communicate. So again, we know their understanding generally is very, very good, and they're able to take that in, but without any hand use, without any verbal speech, that's very difficult for them to be able to communicate. So we work with some specialists in terms of finding alternative ways to communicate. Some of that involves eye gaze technology, which some of your listeners might be familiar with.
Yeah.
So operating a computer device using your eyes, and
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's really opened up a whole new world for lots of people. So we're
Yeah.
really working on that. It's not all about eye gaze though, and having that device. You also need to have a really good yes/no for lots of situations.
Yes.
PECs don't work for people with Rett syndrome because you need the hand use, but there
Okay.
are low-tech ways that you can through partner-assisted scanning. So I'm looking at you, I'm looking at the cup, or you're asking me a question and we're looking at things and I'm giving you a yes/no. So there are lots of ways that people can learn to communicate, and obviously that's just so important and life-changing for so many people, for their confidence, their self-esteem, being able to express what hurts, all those sort of things, and just
Of
after the treatment.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. And how many families are you supporting across the UK?
So it's around
Typically.
1,100 at the moment.
Okay.
And if we reckon if everyone who has Rett syndrome, based on the prevalence rate and the population of the UK, if they were all diagnosed correctly and are in contact with us, then it would be around 1,500. So we know there is certainly people that aren't accessing our service. Now, some of that will be through misdiagnosis, but we also know it.
Yeah.
And I'd like to really appeal to your community as well and families is that the Rett syndrome affects all ethnicities. It's not, and that's at the same rate for everybody. But there are certainly communities that we're not engaging with that are hard to reach, particularly in the Black and minority ethnic communities and that, which are underrepresented in our charity. And
Okay.
it's really, we feel those families are missing out on the services that we can provide, the information that
Yeah.
we have. We've got over 30 years of experience of helping families with Rett syndrome. And when anyone will know if they've got a rare disorder and they're going to hospital, then seeing the doctor, Googling your rare disorder is really the last thing you want to see. You want to know that someone understands what they're dealing with, how to treat you,
Yeah.
which is where we can help with those things. So, there are definitely for reasons, I think, particularly in perhaps some of the Asian families where you might have marriages between sort of close relatives or second cousins, that sort of thing. But this is not nothing anybody's done. This is not anything you could have done differently. It's purely new mutation that starts with that child,
Okay.
and it's completely random. And sometimes I think we get feedback that oh no, we can't engage with you. We really need to be able to access those families, and hopefully they feel comfortable coming to us so we can actually help them.
Yeah. Yeah. How has the current situation impacted your families?
Massively, yeah, because they are such a vulnerable group. So they are in the groups that we're shielding. So whilst that's being paused at the moment, obviously the risk hasn't gone away to those families. So we've got families where they've cancelled their carers, they haven't accessed to the day services, and we're not just talking about children here. We've got families, their parents in their 80s who've taken their adult children out of residential settings because of the risk of being in a care home and haven't cared for them for years. And obviously, they're of an age themselves. And they're now caring for someone who's got 24/7 needs at home. So that's
Wow.
massive. We've got the young children in the younger families where there are siblings. The impact of siblings has been massive. So having their disabled sibling at home, and sometimes that disabled sibling has got challenging behaviour, and seeing that all the time, and there's no chance the parents going to be able to homeschool the other children as well when they're dealing with someone with such complex needs. So the impact of families is massive, and we've got real concerns about the mental health of parent carers, also siblings going forward, and for the people with Rett syndrome. The other situation is where you've got people with Rett syndrome that are in residential settings, and they're not seeing their family, and they're used to having very regular contact with them. Again, they've got really good understanding. They're very prone to suffering from depression and anxiety. And there's a real concern that they're not out and about, they're not stimulated, they're not getting their usual activities. So yeah, it is a real concern.
Yeah, so it's for so many of our families of children with all different diagnoses. It's a really tough time for everybody. Is there any current research into Rett syndrome? What's the latest thinking? Any promising therapies, treatments?
Yeah, there are, and I mean that's really the thing to hang on to hope for. There is several ways that you could potentially cure Rett syndrome, and in 2007 there was a really exciting experiment. It was in lab mice, and they were actually able to reverse the symptoms of Rett syndrome in lab mice. Now, I mean, it was a genetic trick, so it's not the same thing that you could actually reproduce in humans, but what it did show was the principle that the symptoms could be reversed. And since that, then that's been the point where then actually was a huge amount of interest in the research for Rett syndrome. So the things that are actually on the table at the moment that people are looking at are gene editing, gene therapy techniques. So potentially, remember earlier in the talk we were talking about the genetics, where you've got two X chromosomes in a typical female cell. One X chromosome is working and one is silent. And if you can actually turn on the one that's working and turn on the good one and turn off the one that's got the bad information on it, potentially you can have quite a transformative cure at that point.
Okay.
And there are other things where the cause of the Rett syndrome, I think it's genetic. There's a protein, a MECP2 protein, which is actually missing in the cells. So if you can actually deliver the MECP2 protein, and it has to be delivered in the right quantity, it's they refer to it as a Goldilocks effect. So too much of it is damaging and too little of it is damaging. It has to be just right. So there's techniques around that. But they are hoping that within the next year or so, they'll be able to start a gene therapy trial in humans, which would be hugely interesting. Yeah. And then sort of the more immediate term, there are drug trials running at the moment, which won't be the transformative cure that gene therapy or gene editing potentially can deliver, but it will help with certain symptoms, we hope, particularly around things like breathing or motor coordination, hand use and things like that. So there are some drugs, say actual trials running at the moment. COVID obviously is playing havoc a bit with that, but yeah. So I think, we're learning stuff all the time, and there's much to be hopeful for, definitely.
And therapy-wise, what are there any therapies that are particularly effective for it, or?
Yeah. So we talked about the communications. The speech and language therapy is obviously very important. But physical side, so physiotherapy, occupational therapy, and music therapy, swimming, so hydrotherapy, and hippotherapy, which is essentially horse riding, because that really helps strengthen the core and lessens the degree of curvature of the spine and that sort of thing as well. So really from the point of diagnosis, then all those things are very important. And if you're thinking about, potentially a cure in the future, the better physical shape that you can keep the person in, then the more likely to be able to benefit from that.
And do families typically find that the NHS provision in those areas is adequate? I was joking.
That would be a no then.
Shocking.
No, I mean, unfortunately it's still a postcode lottery. There's definitely some areas that are better than others. But no one would say hold their hands up and say they're completely happy with all the therapies that they get and access to it. It is really difficult. The resources we know are spread really thin, and it is really hard for families to get everything that they need. And they're constantly, as you know, as a parent yourself, it's another battle.
Yeah.
Nothing's handed you onto a plate, and no one tells you about it unless you are linked in with a charity that is specifically there to support families. No one offers up the information. Otherwise, you have to go out and find it yourself.
Yeah. As well as respite for families, so that parent carers can have adequate rest and for their own mental health and
Yeah, respite is a big issue for us. We're fighting a lot of cases at the moment where, obviously, because of COVID, services have had to shut for a while, and even the ones that have reopened now, it's nowhere near the level of services that they were getting before. People are put into bubbles, etc., and a much reduced service. So that's really concerning. At what point does that all kick back in again, and can people actually start functioning again? Because at the moment they're just fighting to survive and get through each day, and it's so distressing to hear their stories. And there has been a lot of publicity about it. Sadly, as you're probably aware yourself, I mean, there's far more publicity about children and young people with a disability than about the adults. And we've got about 70% of our families that still have got their adult children living at home because they don't trust the respite services and the level of care that they're actually going to get.
Yeah.
And you don't hear about that. You don't hear about the plight of the adult parent carers so much, or hardly at all. Lots of surveys that have been circulated. Do we want to hear about the impact of COVID on children and young people? And we're constantly saying, hang on a minute, these children and young people grow up, and these people live, and they don't get the same level of attention. The parent carers don't get the same level of support. At transition, it's like facing a cliff edge. Your therapies that you did have fall away. Try getting a physical therapy session when you're over 18. I mean, it's nigh impossible.
Yeah.
So, I'm waving the flag for the adult parent carers.
Yeah.
Because they are over.
Yeah, and it's off. I mean, my son hasn't had a physiotherapy session since he was 5.
Right.
But yeah. So, in terms of Rett UK, what's on the horizon? What are you focusing on over the next few years? What are your plans?
Well, I will flag up on the immediate horizon coming up in November. If you look on our website, it's on our social media feeds as well, and it's although it's Rett specific, it's a communication conference, so alternative forms of communication. But there's so much of the learning in that is applicable across a very wide group of people who've got complex communication. It's a free conference. It runs for the whole week from the 15th to the 21st of November. So all the information is on our website. We've got world-renowned speakers there, and so it is all free. You don't need to be a Rett parent. Anybody can register for that. I'm sure you'll get something out of it. So yeah, have a look at that. The other things that we're focusing on are supporting mental health and wellbeing. So we're in the Big Give Christmas Challenge, if people are familiar with that. And our project this year is actually about mental health and wellbeing and how we can live that online. I would say post-COVID, because we're not post-COVID at all, but the impact is ongoing. So we're focusing on that. Obviously, most of our services are online at the moment. And for the next few years, I think it will be really picking up the pieces from this. However, and whenever we get out of this, there is definitely going to be a long-term impact for not just our families at Rett UK, but for lots and lots of families who've got children and young people and adults with complex needs, it's a massive.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. What was it? I had another question that's gone out my brain. So, could you give us any examples of maybe even your own daughter of some positive stories of families that you've helped and how you've impacted on their life and
Yeah,
how they deal with the
we're
diagnosis?
just thinking this week, we've had 3 great results. So 2 families that we've been supporting to get additional respite care. So they had a very minimal package, which laughingly they refer to as a short break. And essentially it was just an hour in the morning for this person. But for a child with very complex medical needs who has 2 life-threatening disorders, and she was getting an hour a week an hour a day, 5 days a week in terms of her support. And she's got 2 younger children as well. And we've managed to get that up to 20 hours a week. Plus, they're now getting looked at for overnight respite care as well.
Wow.
There's another family that had repeatedly been refused permission to buy an all-terrain buggy, so as opposed to your standard wheelchair, but an all-terrain buggy that you can go on something other than flat tarmac on. And particularly important for people at the moment to be able to get out and about.
Yeah.
So turned down by a CCG through a personal health budget, even though they'd actually handed back in the best part of £40,000 in underspend, and we're talking about being asked to spend £2,000 of that on this buggy. They kept hitting a brick wall, so we advocated on their behalf, and permission's been granted for that. And with our communication project, we've got 10 loan eye gaze devices, which we loan out to families and then give them training support on how to use them as well. And the feedback that we get from that is just amazing. So lots of things that we can do to really help families.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. It sounds like you do amazing work there. We will put links to the conference that you spoke about, and if you send us anything else over, website links, we can put them all under the post so that families, as you say, some of the information, a good amount of the information, I imagine, is relevant for other diagnoses as well, so families can always pick up other things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to add before we finish?
No, just say thank you very much for having this opportunity. I mean, it's great to be able to share this information, hopefully reach a few more people. You know, this is all worthwhile, even if one person is sitting there thinking, gosh, maybe my daughter, you know, as scary as that is, actually having a diagnosis does help. You know, you all get access then to support and information. There's answers some questions for you. And even if it's a family out there who's already got a diagnosis but not in touch with Rett UK for whatever reason, I really would encourage you, you know, don't be shy. Please do get in touch with us. There's so much that we can help you with, and we are here to fight your corner for you. So thank you to you guys for the opportunity.
No problem. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too.